Capacity builders, as you deepen your individual awareness, how are you finding that you are showing up differently at your job or looking at your field in a new way? Come on in and join us.
Jody, now you always set us up with these fire questions when we get started. So I am so excited to get into this conversation today. But before we do, we're going to start with introducing this amazing woman, Monica Reinagel. Welcome to the studio.
Thank you, Nita. I'm glad to be here. I'm here from my hometown of Baltimore, Maryland, and I am a nutritionist and a podcaster with the Nutrition Diva podcast and the Change Academy podcast. And now I'm really excited to be on the Urgency of Awareness podcast.
Well, Monica, when you think about the question that Jody asked, right, as you deepen your own awareness, how has that impacted how you show up in your field?
Well, I just have to back it up and say I first met Jody 5 years ago at an event called Foodfluence that was actually happening in Hungary.
Oh, wow.
And
Hungary.
And I got to give a shout out to Gender Network sponsored Foodfluence and Stephen McCulley. And I was there through a sponsorship of General Mills to speak, and you were a participant. And that's where, we first met those 5 years ago.
That's where I first learned about upward and downward facing triangles.
That's right.
It was a lot to try to take in. There was a lot of new information there. So I work mostly in the field of communications.
Okay.
And as a result of that work that started 5 years ago, still a work in progress, for sure.
Oh, definitely.
I've become much more aware and mindful of how we talk about food, nutrition, and health in the media. Mm-hmm. And aware of the fact that a lot of us behind the mic, a lot of us doing the talking, are speaking as if everybody is basically coming from where we come from. Everybody shares our experience.
Yes.
And it really opened my eyes to how different the experiences of the people listening to those messages might be, and the unintended ways in which we kind of exclude them from the conversation just by the way we talk about things.
And I wanted for listeners, I think that's so important because we all do that. Like every human speaks from their experience. You know what I mean? So we all speak from our experience. When we don't have the awareness, we don't realize that we're excluding.
Right.
So, we think, oh, well, I was just all inclusive. But if we don't have the awareness, well, no, we spoke from our experience, which unintentionally excluded a whole bunch of identities.
Yeah. I think it is unintentional.
Absolutely.
So I've tried to really kind of increase my own sensitivity to that when I'm putting together my messages, even the way the images I choose to put in slides if I'm presenting at a presentation. Like,
that's
wait
big.
a minute. So I'm, it's like I said, work in progress. But I think it's also really sensitized me to the larger conversations that I see playing out around me. And one of the ones that has really kind of stuck in my craw this last couple of years is this movement called lifestyle medicine. Has that crossed your radar screen? Lifestyle medicine.
You talked to me about it and I was like, I didn't know.
I think it's something
But then I'm not reading a lot of fitness magazines or anything, so
I think where it's actually happening is more in the medical field.
Okay.
The medical doctors who are kind of tuning in and being like, wait a minute, instead of waiting till everybody gets sick and then, prescribing drugs to fix it, what if we were to back up and try to intervene in the lifestyle choices that people are making that could keep them healthier, right? So that sounds reasonable.
Yes.
Where it sticks for me is in that word choice, because the message that I see coming through this lifestyle medicine movement is we just need to make better choices, that your health is up to you, that if you make good choices, you will enjoy good health. And what I'm beginning to understand is that what I may see as a choice that I can make may not really be a choice that is available to other people.
Come on, speak on it.
And the unintended consequence of this, I think, is when we lay out this framework where we say, like, look, all you have to do is choose right. You need to choose better foods to eat and to pack for your kids for their school lunches and to serve them when they get home. And you need to move more and do all of these healthy habits that will ensure your good health. And we don't recognize that those choices are not equally available to everyone. We're really speaking from our own perspective of what we get to choose or what's available to us. The unintended consequence there is that when people do find themselves suffering from poor health, that somehow this makes it their fault. because they just didn't choose well. And that is not okay with me.
And that goes back to in our health season, what we talked about, it starts that shame cycle at the individual level.
Yes.
And then that just perpetuates now my mental health and affects my mental health as well as my physical health.
Yeah.
But I like what you're saying is as you deepen your individual awareness, you're actually looking at your field differently. Like you were messaging that maybe 5-10 years ago you would have gotten on board with and even perpetuated is now quoting you sticking in your craw. You're like, wait a second, this isn't going to land well with people who don't have this choice or this experience.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for us listeners, that's part of that journey is as we deepen our awareness, let's go back and look at all the messaging that we're putting out in our field and the work and is it being inclusive or is it still unintentionally operating from that normalized dominant experience?
Right.
And I not to cut your wisdom, but what I loved about what you said was the mindfulness part. A lot of times I feel like as people have come into like saying that they're being mindful in things, the action part, the execution part is not always the commitment. You know what I'm saying? And so what I heard you say was like you're committed to not only like being aware of it, but you're also committed to executing by doing different. And that is so cool.
Yes.
That is so cool.
Well, and what I will say, and maybe this is why people sometimes don't make that effort, is it is an effort.
It's work. It's the work. That's the work.
It's not just that it's hard. Yes, it is. But it's not just the work. I don't think people are afraid of work. What I'm saying is it takes more time. It slows us down. So,
and that's the work.
Right.
You got to be willing, right? And that's the piece that people want to like, to me, jump over.
Yeah.
It's like, you know it, you know you can do it, but are you willing to do it?
Because it does take more time.
Because it does. Because
and
of
it's
the
more
things.
intentional.
Right.
And there
because
may
of
be
the
pushback.
Yes,
Well,
right?
because of the things.
Right. We may get pushback. Although now I find like I'm the one pushing back. You know, when I see these posts, I'm like, hey, you know, what are we saying here? What are we not saying here? But to the point of taking more time, because of the many, many conversations that you and I have had, Jody, both in official kind of spaces where we're doing the work together and also just casually, I've come to understand that whole efficiency thing, like I got to be really efficient about how I do, is totally a normalized dominant concept, you know, like how can I make my work super efficient and be productive so I can get more done in less time?
Come on.
And that's what rubs up against this, like, whoa, it slows me down if I have to stop and try to think, wait a minute, what am I not considering? Who am I unintentionally excluding? It makes my process less efficient.
Now, I'm going to, in the middle of an episode, I'm going to ask listeners a question. Do you relate to what Monica's saying? And can you make that connection between why our societal system emphasizes efficient, effective productivity, how that it's connected to normalized dominant? So that's very much when you grow up in a normalized, the societal system that normalizes one thing over the other. In America, we normalize being employed. And so much is tied to employment, often better health insurance, often paid time off, often any type of maternity leave, all is tied to employment. And so employment becomes very important. Go to parties and how many times you're not at a party for more than 3 minutes. Well, what do you do? And then the bigger your job is, the more we're like, oh. And then we want you to produce. Yes. And so we talked about it in season 1 is that sometimes we're so busy trying to produce that we ignore our own feelings. We ignore our body talking to us, telling us that it's stressed out, because we live in a societal system that has really put the emphasis on producing. And so what I hear you saying then is, wow, having the awareness is one thing, but applying it actually sometimes slows up my efficient and effectiveness and producing, which is counter to what we don't get rewarded for that. Telling your boss, well, I spent time with my team processing isn't always rewarded. Where if I said, hey, I spent time with my team and we got A, B, and C done, is often,
here's my deliverables.
Yes.
And as you're talking, I'm thinking, right. And producing is actually kind of the opposite of relating, processing. there's no deliverables there. And so we skip over those to your point,
and I'm
to
gonna
get to the producing.
I'm going to interrupt and say now we're doing research in numerous ways as I work with companies that there is deliverables. But it's taken this long.
I want to hear more about that.
That's taken us this long to even do that research.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And so now we understand, because we know that, okay, if you have a diversity in your employment, that's a positive. But if they can relate, if that space where people are feeling safe and they can show up, that team, how much more it produces. So they're starting that, but it's not researched that as often.
And for me, it's really interesting because I live in a world I'm cool with research, but I feel like it's a white people thing because we do it, right? Like literally we have examples. We got the blue ocean, or what's the spaces where the blue, where people live 100 years?
The blue zones.
The blue zones.
Yeah. Which
right?
has now been discredited, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like they're living examples of what people want research for. So it's just really interesting hearing y'all talk about it, because I'm sitting back here like, it's cool for the research, but we really do have examples of it. And it's such a beautiful thing because when you actually do the work, that's where a lot of our peace is. Our sense of peace, because now we're relatable. We're in it with each other. We're actually slowing down to feel, right? We're actually slowing down to pay attention to others. Like, there's so much peace and comfort that comes with it once you do it and you acknowledge it. And the part is, when you begin to push back, us having to be comfortable with what people are going to say because of our pushback.
Yeah, because you run the risk of isolating yourself from the pack,
you feel it,
right?
You feel it. You feel like that, but there actually is a pack that will receive us, right?
Yeah.
Like, but it's stepping outside of the pack that we think should be receiving us to really find our people that's really in that direction of where we're looking to go.
Although I hate for
nervousness.
this to be a situation where I step out of one pack and into another pack, I want to find a way that pushback can not just cause people to line up, on one side or the other side, but actually cause people to stop and think.
Yeah.
Can I just add something about the research
Absolutely.
piece? Because that's where that's my training, was in research.
Well, and I want to pull in the listeners on this. So where do you fall when you hear research? Does it just make you go, wah, wah? Or are you like, hey, is that research-based? Is that evidence-based? Because there is very different experiences. And I do, talking about patterns again, is oftentimes people who haven't always experienced the normalized dominant identities don't put as much emphasis on research, because oftentimes we've seen things being done in the community that work and we just know it works and we don't need research to tell us it works, but not to say there's not importance of research. It's that both and.
It's the both
and that's what I heard you two talking about with research is both and, as well as, like you said, I don't want to leave one pack to be a part of another pack. So tying all of what we're talking about back to the material is how we view research sometimes is reflective in the identities we hold and how we've experienced the societal system. And then that always, we want to be both and not create another either or. But so now tell us how you look at research, and that's important to you. That's
Well, it is interesting because I come out of that sort of normalized academic training where research is so prized, like that's the gold standard. And in fact, ironically, and I know you've seen these slides too, we organize research in an upward facing triangle.
Yeah, research is done normalized dominant.
Right. But I mean, we literally portray it that way. Like down here are observational and you move up to the top of the triangle to the gold standard. Right. So that's how ingrained this is. So yeah, there's this huge value for research. And if you're serious and if you're going to be taken seriously, you have to base your material on the research, almost to the exclusion of what you're talking about, which is sort of anecdotal, learned experience. What is happening in in that messy community that doesn't fit neatly into a research study. But this brings me to a conversation that you and I have had off mic, but let's bring it on mic now, that when we do research, our job is to isolate the problem, the question, to eliminate as much of the context as possible so we can answer it in a statistically satisfying way, right? And as we've talked about, that other way of viewing problems as this is a thread in a tapestry, and if I just pull this thread out to look at it all by itself, I've lost the thread, right? Yeah. And that's very antithetical to a research focused approach on problem solving, is that more holistic view.
So Monica, if I hear you correctly, you're saying, like, we listeners know, we've talked about how our institutions often operate normalized dominant. Well, so does research, right?
Absolutely.
And so research is often run through that normalized dominant lens with normalized dominant questions. And it's often trying to isolate one thread, where for other people who've experienced the societal system, the thread isn't as important, if I hear you right, Nita, as the tapestry. So the tapestry is where some of us put our focus, and the thread is where others put our focus. And so for our listeners to think about the research that's done in the fields that we live and work in, how much do we value that research, and how is that reflective of the identities we hold? Because what I find is a lot of times the more normalized dominant identities we hold, the more we like to talk about that thread, and we like the research. And oftentimes the more we hold identities that aren't normalized dominant, it's like, no, it's about the tapestry. And what we clearly want to say, it's both and. There is both value in the tapestry as well as the thread. And how do we value both, hold both, and make sure that both inform us as we move forward? This makes me think of an example. Is I work with a lot of First Nations in the United States and in Canada, and I'm talking specifically about the Menominee Nation. They have a program where they work with their youth, and they're bring them to go fishing in the river, but they teach them the very traditional ways, which was taught to them, which is there's a way that you approach the river, there's a way that you step into the river, there's a way that you do all of this. Yes. And later, when trauma-informed researchers, because their community works a lot, they're very trauma-informed and they work a lot, and when researchers came out and were examining that program, they were just like, oh my gosh, you guys are doing all the things that we've shown help a person process the trauma that's held in the body. And they started saying, the fact that you guys go into the river slowly is huge, because pressure on the body is very helpful. But as you slowly, it goes up your body, that helps. If you were just to jump in, that sudden pressure and sudden temperature can actually be shocking and actually be harmful. Wow. And so the researchers were just like, oh my gosh, did you guys know that you're doing every step? Is this intentional? And they're like, we're doing what's been done for thousands of years because it works.
Right.
And so for them, the emphasis is on, this is what we've known to do, which I think comes back to what you were saying, Nita, of, that's the tapestry. That's where our emphasis is. This is tradition. This is what we do because we know it works.
We know it works.
And the researchers are like, they want to know why it worked and have that list, right? And so for us as listeners, what one do we value more? Because we do, because I know, and what we value more, whether it's research or whether it's that tapestry, is that reflective of the identities we hold.
It definitely is.
For me, it is, because I've never emphasized research, but I know that comes from the identities I held growing up. Those not normalized dominant identities. And when you're not seen and heard, or research is being done on you and not with you, it affects how you look at research.
Absolutely.
But I have to hit the pause button on myself so that I can take time to value the research, because there is value in it. And so hitting that pause button and seeing both sides of and operating out of both and become very important in the work that we do.
Right. And for me, I also have to hit that pause button, but it's to remind myself that research is not the one and only source of truth and wisdom. Exactly. But if we can both remember to hit that pause button, then we can leverage the information,
the richness of both and.
Yes.
And I'll be honest, listeners, we've done this before, where we're both hitting the pause button and then we're showing up to listen to understand. So I try to listen to understand.
You and I.
Yes. And then we have some rich dialogues. I always walk away thinking about things differently, but it is because I think we have that awareness and we're applying some of the tools that we talked about, like in season 1.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, the work never ends, right? We're never done. And I am constantly having to hit that pause button. It just happened to me last month in the podcast, in my Nutrition Diva podcast. And, you know, I always feel sheepish afterwards. I was like, oh, there it was again. So my editorial team asked me to produce an episode for college kids going back to school in the fall. Can you do some nutrition tips for college students? I was like, sure, I can do that. So I recorded the whole episode. But of course, I was thinking about college students like the college student that I was, 18, 19 years old, away from home for the first time, living on campus, going to school. That was my job. And so that was the kid. Now it's been a minute since that was me, but that was the kid that I was picturing. And so I wrote the episode really with that college student in mind. Yeah. Episode went out. I felt great about it. The same day, I got an email from a woman who works for a nonprofit out in California, supporting college students who have a very different experience. Yeah. And she was angry with me. She was like, Monica, I've been a fan of your podcast for a long time, but you really disappointed me in this episode because you assumed that all college students are 19-year-olds who are wasting their money on frappuccinos. And I'm here to tell you that there's a lot of college students out there who are working full time, who are raising children, who are supporting other kids
in their 30s, 40s.
And she
returning back.
Yes. And she shared some statistics that I was completely unaware of. The shocking percentage of current college students who have experienced food insecurity in the last year. But she then went on to share resources that I was also unaware of. That she was like, you missed an opportunity to help for these people to be seen and to share with them resources that they might not know exist.
Come on.
There was a report that the GAO, the Government Accountability Office, released that 59% of the college students who would be eligible for SNAP benefits don't access them because they don't know that they exist, or because they don't know that they're eligible. They don't know how to access them, or they're embarrassed to ask for them.
That's a big one.
Programs where kids can donate unused swipes on their meal cards to other kids who, need the help, and nobody has to know anything about. So anyway, I get this email from her. I was like, oh my gosh, I really did drop the ball. And that's when I hit the pause button and started thinking about, all right, so what do I do now? Right.
Yeah.
Right.
How do you make it make
Which
sense?
right there is awareness, because a lot of times in the past, what would you may have done?
Well, interestingly, I forwarded her email to my team, and I was like, oh, look what just came in. And my editor responded the way I probably would have responded 5 years ago. She was like, the episode was fine. Yeah. Don't worry about it. There's always going to be somebody who's unhappy.
And for listeners, you just articulated a huge benefit of being normalized dominant is we can write off people so fast. We don't have to listen to someone.
You know what? And she's busy being efficient and productive and trying to get the end of her workday, and didn't have time.
Yep.
And because I have been there for 16 years, I can actually say, hold up.
Yeah.
I want to address this. I totally dropped the ball, and I want to do something to correct the record, or to expand my coverage of this topic. So I asked them if we could record a bonus episode to accompany that episode.
Absolutely.
This is really important to me. I basically read this woman's email on air. And I was like, look, I can't say this any better than she did. Let me just read this to you. I want to make sure, first of all, I want to say I blew it.
Yeah. I
was doing exactly what she thought I was doing, which was seeing college students through my very narrow lens. Yeah. Wow. And there's a lot of people having a different experience who were not seen and were not included in that. And moreover, I really want people to know about these resources that I didn't know about. So we were able to put out that bonus episode. But yeah, just I guess you helped me see when we were talking about this, that when that email came in, that I didn't just be like, ugh, can't please everybody. And I was like, wait a minute, I blew it.
What I love about this is in Project Diva International with our girls in middle school and high school, we are teaching them that, number one, we don't live in silos, right? Like we're not born to live in silos. And so for this woman to have enough interest in you, right, to reach out and share that, not that you so much dropped the ball, but let's expand your awareness, right? And then you were conscious and aware enough to say, okay, let me push the pause button. And then look at how from her to you to then you were able to see where your team is developmentally to be able to then help them expand. Right? Like that was so beautiful.
I'm so glad that you highlighted her response because, right, she's a busy professional too.
Exactly.
With a work day that probably goes a little bit too long.
Come on.
And after she heard that, she actually took the time to reach out to me, which is not everybody would.
No.
You know, she could have just written me off. But,
And that's one for myself, for listeners. When we hold a normalized dominant identity and someone who doesn't hold that normalized dominant identity or is bringing us the voice of folks who don't have the normalized dominant identity brings forth that viewpoint, are we honored by it?
Yeah.
Because we should be. Because it means that person, because Nita has 100 opportunities a day to teach people what it's like to be a black woman in America.
Who has got time?
Right. So if
and it's not my job.
Right.
Also.
Not her job, and you ain't got time. So if Nita takes the time to say, hey, Jody, you really operating out of your whiteness.
It's a gift.
Exactly.
It
Do we
is.
view it as the gift that it is? Because one, she's taking the time. Two, she must think I'm worth that time.
Exactly.
And three,
Exactly. And
she's given me an opportunity. You know, and you sometimes we have to fight through those feelings of
It's uncomfortable.
That's the
Yeah.
word, right?
You
That's
used
the word.
earlier sheepish. You feel sheepish. You feel defensive.
Yep.
You feel these feelings. That's why we put that feeling tool in the first season.
Right.
Is you got to process those feelings to be able to hold the space, see it as the gift that it is, and then start to move forward. And I love that you just read that email because she couldn't have said it better. So she's seen, and then those resources can get out there.
Yeah.
That was beautiful.
And that we all do this. We all
Literally.
show up. Because I would have, if I were you, because I'm that person that went to 3 or 4 colleges, I may have lost count, it took, 9, 10 years, 12 to get a degree, but whatever. So I had the opposite experience, and I was the person that went on food stamps when I was in college.
Right.
But if I would have done that from my experience, I wouldn't have been thinking about that other college kid. Do you know what I mean? So I could have erred on the opposite side. And so we all are, as humans, always show up from our experience.
Always.
The more we are aware of our experience and what our experience might be missing, then the more we can see what a gift it is when someone points it out to us rather than be defensive or write it off. And we can make sure that other side does get voice.
Right.
Is what I hear you.
Yeah. And as you're saying, I'm realizing that when you first presented this material to me, and I'm just going to tell tales on myself, because I'm that high achieving student. Like I want to get an A, I want to get it right.
Yeah.
And in that first session or two, I really felt like my job, I will have succeeded when I never do that again.
Yes.
And now here I am 5 years later. I'm like, I am never gonna do that again. Like I'm gonna do this over and over and over again.
Yeah. As long as you have
so
breath.
that's been another journey of awareness because I really came into this thinking like, okay, I see what my job is here. I'm gonna crush it.
Yes.
Yes. There were a lot of phone calls at the beginning of our relationship. She's like, well, wait a minute. How do I get this right? And I'm like, well, let's define the word right first. There is no right. Let's look at that.
Unpack some
We
things.
had to unpack a couple normalized dominant beliefs and values.
No, it's
Right.
taken a
So-
few years to unclench my fist around that goal of getting this right.
love
So
it.
to anybody that's like a little bit earlier on this, I'm like, right, I get that.
Yeah.
If you're feeling frustrated or if you're feeling
It's a part of it.
impatient to get it right
It's
or
a
to
part
get
of
to the other side of this discomfort or something,
Yeah.
you won't. But it'll get more and more okay.
Yes.
As you go.
It gets quote unquote easier and more. You get more comfortable being uncomfortable.
Exactly.
But what else is the reward for you showing up differently? I want you to talk to the listeners about that. It's a great way to end this episode.
Yeah.
So I hear you saying, hey, I look at my field different. I see the measurements in our field aren't always accurate. I see how we word things aren't always, are coming from normalized dominant, which I think all of us can take and go back and apply. And then you talked about how you individually now are responding to things differently. So what are to me that's normalized dominant vocabulary, an award, you have to be rewarded, but how do you see the positive of taking the time to operate out of this compared to if you went to 5 years ago? What do you think are the things that motivate you to keep doing this? Because why?
I think one of the things that was gratifying, I'll say, not rewarding, but gratifying about that exchange was the dialogue that I was able to have with that listener who reached out to me, you know, and the back and forth that we had and the connection that happened there. That was very gratifying. I was grateful to have the capacity to respond the way I did afterwards, because it was like, oh, okay, that was good. But I guess I also have to acknowledge that I was in a position of privilege in the options that I had to go back, and I had a do-over on that.
Right, because you
I
said
could
you
go
had
to my
16
team,
years of, so you have credibility and enough power to go back to your team and say
I need to do a bonus episode, right? And
Wow.
and that I'm just kind of recognizing as we're talking about, like, right there is privilege,
Right.
that I got to do that over, which definitely made me feel better, you know,
Right.
because I had an opportunity to correct that error, and that is not always available, right? So right there is, you know, that was a reward that I got, because I could, I'll throw this word in there, I'll throw this bomb in there, I could fix it.
Yeah,
Right?
You could,
I love that. And a couple of things that I heard that I really appreciate, I love you, is the words reward versus gratified. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, that was a beautiful twist to it, right? Like, you were grateful for the moment versus feeling like you needed to be rewarded for it. And that's words are very important, right? And then the second thing is you had capacity, right? Because doing this work gives you the capacity.
well,
So
I'm
I
gonna
really
throw a
value
third
that.
thing on it. She's doing what I heard you say that you work with the girls in Project Diva about, is breaking down those silos. And so you broke down that silo, because that could have been, when she gave you that feedback, you could have siloed up. And, you know, a lot of us
Just
do
kept it
through
inside,
defense, by writing it off, by whatever. But I heard you say that one of the things that you were gratified by is the exchange that you two could have. So now you two, because you could have that exchange, increase both your capacities.
And because of your privilege, you were then able to share that with the world, right?
Yeah.
Like, so I mean, all of it was just, it was a beautiful dance.
Well,
Great
and
job.
there's
Great job.
well,
Well,
don't I feel rewarded? But there's another aspect to that silo thing. When she reached out to me, I think that it would have been possible for me in the past to be like, those kids are not listening to this podcast.
justify.
Right? Like,
Ooh, now she just dropped us. Oh, that's a truth bomb, listeners. How many times do we have a reaction and then we justify it real fast?
right.
See,
like, I don't need to
and
worry about that, because those are not the people, those are not my
Right.
listeners, but
Yeah.
maybe now they could be.
Exactly.
Maybe they weren't, but maybe now she shares that episode in order to get those resources out wider, and maybe now those silos have come a little bit closer together, you know? So when we are too focused on, like, look, I'm going to speak to my audience because I understand them and I can serve them best, that's one way to go, you know? Or we can think like, oh, if I spoke from more, if I was able to represent more perspectives, how much more diverse could this audience become?
Come on.
you know?
Yeah, that was beautiful.
Absolutely. And how much can it influence how other people see it? Because you have a lot of normalized dominant people maybe listening to that episode, but now you're talking about this experience, and that makes them go, oh yeah, I didn't realize that, you know, because they too were thinking about their college experience in one way and listening to that. But because you brought that up, they're going to incorporate that and think it differently as well. So as I'm thinking about this for myself and for listeners, the more we deepen our awareness and we build our capacity, we can start going back to the work we do, the volunteering that we do, and really look at these organizations in a different way, from how they research things to how they word things and then really show up differently. Like, I love your individual example of when we are brought a viewpoint that we didn't see, how we can incorporate it, you know, but it does require us to hit the pause, have awareness, hit that pause button, process our feelings, you know, and use our benefits, our privilege to make sure that's seen, and to look at it as the honor that it is. you know, not to look at it as a burden or and take that step back. When Nita brings something to me about what it's like to be a Black woman, I could easily start to get wrapped up in shame or guilt or feel bad. But then I've not honored the gift that she just gave me. She just gave me an opportunity and a gift, and to really look at it as that helps us break down those silos you talked about, and helps us to continue to build build a capacity, not just within ourselves, but within our relationships and within our institutions, which is ultimately what we're about.
Listen.
Way to wrap it up.
Absolutely. Well, capacity builders, this is what the work looks like. Us building capacity in our own lives, in our communities, and in our institutions. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you chose to hang out with us, and we so value you. And until next time, we'll see you soon.